This is Sarah Levitt with the Making Magnificence Project. And today my guest is Peter Gwaltney, President and CEO of the North Carolina Bankers Association. Peter also currently serves on the ABA Board of Directors and is chairman of the ABA Alliance of State Bankers Associations. Peter Gwaltney, welcome.
Hello, Sarah. How are you?
Hello. As you know, I'm kind of crazy excited to do this interview. And before I kind of go into my curious questions, let's start with you. What's going on with you as CEO of the North Carolina Bankers Association? What you're super excited about, curious about, what's on your horizon?
Well, thank you. Well, we are coming out of a pandemic. And so that has involved a great deal of activity, a flurry of activity from our association working with our members, the banks in North Carolina, and in my work with the ABA, the banks across the country, to respond to the economic tail involved in this health crisis that we've been in. So we've done things that I've never done in my 30-year career, and it's been a great learning experience. But we didn't just do that. During the pandemic, we created a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that has been, what's been involved in that is creating a diversity, equity, inclusion council and working with our members to understand the issues around all of that. And so I'm excited about that. And I'm energized by that. And my staff is really excited about that. Also, during the pandemic, we began R&D on a digital insurance consortium, which is something that, in my understanding, no other such entity exists in the country. And so we've been working on that, and we will launch in July, open the doors on that. So it's been some of the hardest work I've done in my career. It's been the most energizing work in my career. And I am so proud of my staff. I love them all dearly for the work that they've done.
So talk to me a little bit about, it sounds like you've had to kind of brave a new frontier as a leader, and you've been leading for a long time, but you're saying, wow, this has been really challenging. Yes. So can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what about this terrain was super challenging for you, who is an incredibly experienced leader?
Well, anytime you confront something big and unknown, there's a fear of not getting it right.
Yeah.
It's also highly visible. The work we do is highly visible. Bankers are looking to us to tell them what we know, what they need to know, how to proceed through this very ambiguous new environment with the Paycheck Protection Program. For goodness sakes, the CARES Act created that. 7 days later, the Treasury Department and the SBA stood the program up and didn't give the banks the final rules until 7 p.m. the night before the program was to open, and business owners were being told, just go to your local bank, like flip of the wrist, but just go to your local bank.
Yeah.
And so that created a vigil type atmosphere at our association where we were watching by the minute, waiting for guidance to come out of the government so we could just turn it around quickly with some analysis to our members. I knew that bankers were waiting all hours of the night and on weekends and on holidays, waiting for this guidance. So they knew that if we had anything, we would share it with them immediately. And so they had a high degree of trust and confidence, but also reliance on us. And so the fear of not getting that right could paralyze a person. But not my first rodeo. So we knew that information was critical. We needed to get it right. We needed to be available around the clock. And we just, my team embraced this and found energy in this and found purpose in it. And so it's the ambiguity and the unknown and the potential for fear that, you kind of find out what people are made of in these environments. And I'm so proud of the industry that I serve, collaborating with us, working with us, and their clients, their customers, we got it right, because we're seeing a boom in our economy like we haven't seen in a very long time
Yes.
on the
Yes.
heels of a global pandemic. It just doesn't
Yes.
make sense.
Yes. So you've already said so many things that I'm
sorry.
interested in that I'm interested in pursuing. And so I think one of the things you've touched on that is so key is, you've talked about ambiguity. And, that's always, there's been a lot of talk about leading through kind of volatile and uncertain, ambiguous circumstances for a long time. But I think, leaders got a really big heaping plate full of that, right? And are still in it. So you're talking about that as context, those waters that you're swimming in, and then the fear that often accompanies that. So talk to me a little bit about how you steered yourself through that fear of, geez, I want to get this right, and your staff through that.
Great question. Some of this comes from experience, and so I clearly have gray hair, and I've earned it. So what I know to be true is there are times when I don't have the answers. And leaders, we pride ourselves in having the answers and being able to tell people, here's what we are going to do, and here's what you need to do as we steer the ship through these unknown waters. And sometimes you just have to trust that you're going to figure it out. Show confidence and show stability and confidence, but internally, you might be just scared to death. You might be swirling, your stomach might be upset, but you've just got to show that's executive presence. You have to show confidence, and you also have to have confidence in your staff. They are looking to you for confidence. And so there have been many times in my career, and including during this pandemic, where I didn't have the answers, but I knew if given time, I could figure it out. Given time with my staff, who are smart people, I could collect information, get information, and make a good decision based on that. I didn't have to do everything by myself. And so the most important thing a leader can do in those situations is just breathe and just remind ourselves who we are, and that we don't have to have the answer immediately, but just express confidence that we're going to be fine. I'll give you a good illustration, because I love movies and I love stories, and they also sometimes help us create images that help us know what to do, where we might intuitively know what to do. But there's a scene in Apollo 11 where the people in the control room in Houston are worried about the astronauts that are up there. They're about to re-enter, and the people in Houston aren't real sure that that's going to go well. There's been a concern about the heat shield. And they've done all the mathematics they can do. They've done the engineering that they can do. They've done everything they can do. And so now everybody's looking at Ed Harris, and he's sitting there in his white shirt and skinny tie, and they're all exhausted because they've been working around the clock. He buttons his shirt and he pulls his tie up and straightens it, and he says, in so many words, "I believe this will be our finest hour." He had no clue. He just trusted. He trusted the mathematics, the engineering, and he needed everybody around him to calm down and do their jobs. And so that's what we have to do. We have to be Ed Harris in that situation.
Yeah, I love too how you're distinguishing, Peter. So I love the kind of just breathe, right? Like sometimes you just have to breathe. And also that you want to get it right. Like there's a real drive to kind of get things right. But the confidence that that you'll be able to figure it out, that you and the team will be able to figure it out. That distinction, I think, is which leads me.
We wouldn't be in these positions if we couldn't.
Yes. I often talk to clients about, like, you're in that seat for a reason. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Which leads me to kind of, you talking about your team and staff, and kind of leads me to my next question, which is really about, I've heard you say that culture is everything. And you are a CEO who really walks the talk when it comes to culture. You have little to no turnover. Your retention is incredibly high. your team, you know, when the going gets tough, they really do dig in. And I've essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, heard you ascribe that to kind of culture, and culture being everything. So two things. How do you think of culture and how it drives ultimately business results and what you're doing? And what's your role as CEO in driving culture?
Oh, great questions. And I might answer them. I might weave them together. Let's
Of
see.
course, yeah.
When I was about to become a young CEO at the age of 36, I was asked. I asked my executive coach at the time. I had read about culture. I knew culture was important, but as a young person, I really didn't fully understand it. So I asked him. I shared my concern. Tell me how to create the culture that I want. And he smiled at me and said, um, culture happens.
Mm.
You are who you are. You were selected for a reason. You have beliefs and principles and just a core values. You have these values. The organization will be a reflection of you. You can't help it. So my encouragement to you is be authentic, be vulnerable, be transparent, and you'll get the culture you want because the board selected you. So it will work if you'll just be those things. And so that calmed me down as a young, energetic CEO wanting to try to conquer the world. Just relax and be yourself, be transparent, be authentic, and allow myself to be vulnerable. You don't have to be the stoic robot of a CEO. And so that has just been my mantra throughout my career, and it has worked for me so far. So culture happens. Um, and also with my team, it's important that they know that first and foremost, I love them as people. I see them. I want to know their stories. I want to know who they are, where they come from. And I just love them as people. And it starts there. And then I want the very best for them. I want them to feel productive. I want them to not dread work. I want them to have to pull themselves away from their work to get to their families or just whatever they love doing. I want them to feel energized by their work and find their passion. And so I have to listen to them and talk to them often about those things so that we're putting them in the right situations and that they're happy and fulfilled in their work. And then when they don't reach the standards that I expect of them, I need to love them enough to tell them the truth. That here's what I'm seeing, and I'm not telling you this because I'm trying to play gotcha. I want the very best for you. And if you'll do these things or stop doing these things, it'll help your game. Because these things are hurting your game. And I just want you to be the best. And so they know that about me. And so when I say something to them, they know where it's coming from. They don't have to wonder what are the politics behind this, because I'm vulnerable enough and I'm transparent enough that hopefully they never have to think about politics. It's just around my house, we have 6 kids, and the thing has always been daddy tells the truth, you know? So
Yeah.
like, it's kind of that way at the office.
Yeah. And so, a couple of things that I want to kind of follow. So when you say you see them, Peter, what does that mean to you as a leader? What are you doing? So, and how would you kind of explain that to a rising or a current CEO? What does it mean to see your people?
Well, it's so easy just to walk into the office and say, good morning, so-and-so, how was your weekend, or how are you doing? And then get down to the work. I want to know, when you were 5, what was it like being you? What is your family like?
I just got goosebumps, Peter Gwaltney. I just got goosebumps. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
But those things tell us who they are. and their life experience, their story, what they're looking for in life. I, I get emotional just talking about it because it's so important and so central to the work we do. And I didn't always get that part of it. That's come with age, and I guess we mellow with age. But with my team now, and it's not that I want to pry and know all of their business. If they say that's too far, then I respect that. But if they're willing to tell me, I'll tell them what 5-year-old Peter was like, and what my life experience was like, and what my parents, how they treated me, and all these things, because that shapes us. And I just want to have deep relationships that are productive and that we all enjoy. So that's what I see you means to me.
Yeah.
Is just beyond the facade that we bring to work.
Yeah. And so to the very busy CEO, and I have yet to meet one who is not, right? Or work with one who is not. To the very busy CEO who is responsible for ultimately not only the ship staying afloat, but excelling, what would you say to that person when they say, I don't have time for that, Peter? I'm meeting with the board or shareholders, depending on the context of their role. Yeah, the organization.
My number one job is effective leadership. And so what am I leading? I'm not leading an organization, I'm leading people. And so there's no better use of my time than to spend time with my people. And so I had an hour and a half conversation with a staff person this morning who's very important to me. They're all very important to me, but we talked about a lot of things, but we didn't get to work till about 15 minutes in. And then we finished about 10 minutes and wound down on personal issues. I do that all week long with our staff, just doing check-ins. Sometimes there's work involved, and sometimes it's just with my African-American employees, coworkers. I know what's on the news. We're going through some issues in our country.
Yes.
And I want to know how they're feeling about that. I want to know, because it affects their productivity. It affects their emotions. I just want to know about that. And that's part of I see you. But it also, that extends to our clients, and in my world, members, bankers. I drove 3 hours yesterday to go to a 100th anniversary of a small bank in Western North Carolina, because they're as important to me as Bank of America is. And you demonstrate by spending time with people. And you can make phone calls from the truck. I drive a truck. You can do a lot of things while you're traveling, but we lead people, and you have to spend time with people, and it helps if you care about them. That's the cherry on top.
Kind of can't fake that part. Yeah. So it is. Yeah. So I think you've given us a good picture of kind of, when you say that kind of spending time with your people, seeing them, that's the most important, and and being an effective leader is the most important. How does that drive business results?
Great question. And no doubt that it does, because my team knows that I have confidence in them. We have great relationships and clear communication. So they're empowered to make decisions and innovate, try things and fail without criticism. We embrace fast failure. And because otherwise, how do you know if something's going to work? And you can't call 10 other organizations to see if they've tried something and how did it go for you. Sometimes you just have to innovate. And so that drives results. That those relationships and that communication drives results. This past year, we've worked completely remotely.
Yeah, I was gonna go ahead. Yeah.
So we've worked remotely, and we renovated our office back in July of 2019. So we worked remotely from 2019 until the pandemic hit, and then we all just went back to work. We haven't even decorated our office. It just has furniture in it. And so we've been working remotely since the middle of 2019, and we had banner performance in 2019 and 2020, financial and individual personal performance. Just it was counterintuitive, but because we have these relationships and my team leaders, culture happens, they work with their teams the way I work with them. And
it's modeled too, right? So
modeled.
culture, and it's modeled. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I've had mentors throughout my career who were like walking laboratories, walking classrooms. They would say, you know why I did that? I did something. Did you notice? Here's why I did that. So I do that. And so when I do a performance evaluation of a team leader, one of my senior leadership team, I'll explain to them, I'm doing this because of why. And now this is how I want you to treat your team. And so there's just an effectiveness throughout the organization. And so we don't have to be in the same office I don't have to see them working. I just know, I can feel it, there's energy. And so culture really affects our performance.
Yeah, no, you've had a tremendous success. To any leader who's challenged by leading remotely, you're kind of the example of, and not just how to get by. To your point, you've had banner years and are incredibly well positioned in 2021. On the, I want to rewind just a little bit. So on the diversity and inclusion front, what are you seeing there as your role as CEO in terms of leadership? And how are you keeping that in the foreground among all the other things that you have to deal with as CEO?
Thank you for asking, because this is important to me and it's very personal. Just for a lot of reasons. Some of my best friends growing up were Black. My son-in-law is Black. My grandson from another son is adopted. He's Black. And so this is my family we're talking about. And so it's very personal to me. And I've seen through my staff, the diversity we have on our staff brings, forgive the word, it brings color, it brings variety, it brings opinions, that different life experiences. And we listen to everybody, and everybody's input is important. And that makes us effective like we are. And so I want that for other organizations. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion is becoming more important in corporate America, thankfully. And I view my role at the North Carolina Bankers Association as thought leadership. And because this is personal to me, my commitment is I can only control my little corner of the world. And so my little corner of the world is North Carolina's banking industry. And if I can help other CEOs and human resource leaders embrace diversity as a value, and then we integrate it from the boardroom all the way to the teller line, and we're listening to diverse opinions and thoughts, and we understand the communities we serve better, and we can and so here's the dollar and cents part of it. Yes, it's the right thing to do, but what if we start listening differently, and we understand a part of our community better, and we can reach them and serve them? It opens up a market that we maybe haven't tapped yet, so you can make more money. And so it's profitable to do that. Government agencies, the regulatory agencies, expect us to do this, and so we need to do it. We need to do it well. And so we're really in North Carolina wanting to be a model of helping our members understand the issue, helping them embrace it and execute it well. I think is the role I see myself playing in all of this. And we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion council that's made up of 18 men and women, some Hispanic, mostly African-American, and they're senior leaders from community banks and some of the largest banks in the country. and the first meetings we had were just to get acquainted. We didn't just talk strategy. We first had to get to know each other, which meant telling our stories. And I heard heart-wrenching stories about bank executives who've been uh, pulled over countless times because of the kind of car they drove, or bent over a hood is the term they used. And just so many experiences that I didn't have as a white male. But because of my concern for my young son-in-law and my grandson, I'm listening differently. And I want this world to be different. It has to be different. And so, once we all trusted each other and had heard our stories, then we could get down to strategy. So we now have a strategic plan, and we're in the process of executing that.
Yeah, there's so many kind of places I want to go. So I want to rewind a little bit, because we're talking very much about present day and leadership and all that you're kind of navigating and excited about and future focused on and keeping your eye on. But I want to rewind, Peter, to earlier days as a CEO, when you were CEO of the Louisiana Bankers Association, because I know, as we've spoken, that it really, as you've explained it to me, and feel free to tell me if I don't have this, really shaped you as a leader in a number of ways and prepared you for the crisis of the pandemic, which was multi-layered, economic, health, et cetera. So if you could take us back to that time and share as much as you're comfortable, sharing about leading through Hurricane Katrina, and how it shaped you, really marked you in a way, in a positive way, as a leader.
Yeah, it definitely marked me, and I think there's scar tissue from that, but also my faith tells me in all things give thanks, and so I can be thankful for the terrible circumstances we went through because of the things it taught me and the outcomes. And so the night before Hurricane Katrina hit, we were living in Baton Rouge, which is about 45 minutes to an hour from the coast and from New Orleans. And I had a three-way phone call with our commissioner of banking and our main contact at the FDIC on bank supervision. And we came up with a game plan that I remember standing outside. The wind was already blowing, but the hurricane had not made landfall yet. So we came up with a game plan that we would talk the next day and just see what the damage was, because the hurricane was supposed to hit that night. And so we came up with our game plan. And that's where, people say the universe laughs at you when you come up with these plans. And so we had our plan and woke up the next morning. The hurricane had hit and trees were down everywhere. And it was awful. And it was just like every hurricane, because we were used to hurricanes. But what happened hours into the afternoon of that day after the hurricane hit, the levees started to break. And we started hearing on the radio. We didn't have any power, so we could hear from the battery-powered radio that we had. I went to the office. I had to drive over trees to kind of get to the office. I had a four-wheel drive, and sat in my office, shorts and a t-shirt, no air conditioning, no power. And I just kind of listened to the radio. Why I went to the office, I don't know. I just felt like I needed to be there. And so I heard that the levees were breaking, but they didn't fully understand what that meant, what the impact would be. Well, what we knew later that day, the city had filled up like a bowl of water. And that's what New Orleans is. It's just a great big bowl beneath sea level. And so the city filled up with oil, toxic water, and seawater, salty seawater, and just destroyed everything. And so the city had already depopulated for the most part. And so what we were left with was about 27 banks that were flooded to the rooftops, out of business, in a city that had been depopulated. And we didn't know what that meant, because nobody had ever experienced anything like this. And I was a young CEO. And so
Peter, let me pause you for just a minute. Is this your first run as CEO?
Yes, I had been.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah.
So let's see. I was made CEO in 99, and this was August of 2005.
Okay. So you've got some years under your belt, but it's your first gig as CEO. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we had already rebranded the association, of course, and we had built a brand new building,
Yeah.
and it was strategically located in a really nice corporate park surrounded by hotels. And so what had happened was, just fortunately, most of the bankers from New Orleans had booked hotel rooms right there near our office. And so as I sat there, really not knowing what to do because there's no internet, I can't work. I was just sitting there listening to the radio. Bankers started showing up at the office. And it was almost kind of like a scene from Walking Dead. You know, they're just coming up to the office to say, have you seen anybody? And as I greeted them, I'd say, no, but tell me what's going on with you. So we would talk. And then I'd say, before they left, I had a notepad and I'd say, tell me where you're staying so I know how to find you, because cell phones weren't working. All the towers were down. Telephones weren't working because the 504 area code had just been wiped out. It was full of salt water, and so phones didn't work. So there was absolutely no way to communicate, no internet. This is before smartphones. And so I would just have to keep a pad of paper and say, where are you staying? What's your room number? And I'll come find you if I need you, or I'll send somebody to you. So I still have that pad of paper. I have an expanding folder of many pads of paper that I filled up of where people were staying and how we could reach people. But after the second day, I realized we need some system to this. And so I just decided, I told everybody I met, come back here at 2 tomorrow. And then the next day. So every day was 2:00. Come back and we'll see who's in town, and we'll start talking about what's going on. And meanwhile, I lived near the Emergency Operations Center. So the banking commissioner, who lived a long way away, had decided that was too far to commute every day. He was exhausted. So he would stay at my house. He slept on my sofa. And we would go to the governor's operations center to learn every day what was going on and when we could get back into New Orleans. And we would tell the bankers every day at 2:00 kind of where we were and what was going on. Within a week or so, we were able to get an escort, armed escort of National Guard to take us into the city. There was martial law, so you had to go through a checkpoint to get into the city. And every time I drive by there now, when I go to New Orleans, I remember the helicopters and the checkpoint. It was very warlike. And so we took 2 or 3 Suburbans full of bankers with armed guards, National Guard cars with automatic weapons and the whole thing. And we went to certain addresses, bank branches, just so we could do damage assessments and come back and report to the group. In this area of town, this is what it looks like. In this area, this is what it looks like. So we did that assessment, and one of the bankers came up with the idea, when the emergency workers and all the people who are going into the city now, when they start needing cash or they get paid, there's going to be disorder if we don't have an opportunity for them to cash a check or get served somehow. So one of the bankers said, I remember like it was yesterday, he said, what we should do is take like 4 or 5 large branches, I don't care whose bank they are, and let's just share them. And we'll put signs, of whose bank this is. And we can put signs because, again, we couldn't communicate. So we did a PSA on WWL radio there in New Orleans, the historic AM radio station, that on this day, the banks will be open and you can go to these locations and find your bank. And so we put posters all over town, and we did the WWL radio. And so we worked with the National Guard and the governor's office to arrange all of that. And all the banks participated in this and shared these teller windows standing next to each other with their former competitors. And it was all about maintaining order. And I remember my banking professor at LSU used to talk about how the banking system relied on a thin thread of confidence He was really important to me. So I get choked up when I talk about him because he's no longer with us. But he used to say that all the time, and he would gesture like this. There's a thin thread of confidence. And I said those words to our governor, Kathleen Blanco. I said, there's a thin thread of confidence. We can maintain it with this plan. She said, I agree. Let's do it. And so we executed the plan, and it worked beautifully. There were generators running the lights in the branches. There were Humvees and armed guards outside, and everything just worked according to plan. And we had to bust the tellers in and promise their safety, which is, I think of that now with the pandemic. We're trying to keep tellers and frontline workers safe, and we're going to extreme measures to keep them safe, but we're not busing them into a martial law zone that's very dangerous to cash checks. But those precious people were willing to do that. And so we did that for a while. And then just orders started to resume. And I remember one of the bankers was a Marine, and I remember in one of the meetings, he said, because we were sitting we were all just filthy and in shorts and t-shirts, and he stood up and said, gentlemen, I'm just going to pull on my experience and say, we're not going to leave a man behind. We're not going to let a single fail in this experience. And what happened is every bank came out of that process more profitable, stronger than they were before the hurricane, which was completely counterintuitive, much like this pandemic.
I was just going to say, yes.
Same thing.
Yes.
I took back when the Office of Thrift Supervision used to be one of the regulatory agencies. It's now part of the OCC. I took the leader of the OTS, John Rich, who now lives in Huntersville, North Carolina. He's retired. We took a Suburban full of bankers and toured him around the city just so he could see the damage and fully understand. I later did this with the chair of the FDIC, the controller of the currency. They all came down and we did the same kind of tour, but we did them separately. So bankers were sitting there talking about the route and what they were seeing. About 2 blocks into this 1-hour tour around New Orleans, John Rich looked at me and said, Peter, how long does this go on? I said, oh, John, we're going to drive for an hour and it doesn't get any better. And then when we finished, he was very quiet, very somber throughout the trip, because he was seeing the 7th Street Canal that just completely tumbled homes out of its way when it blew. When we got to a place, we had arranged a meeting place for bankers to have a roundtable with him. And when we got there and he met with the bankers, they all asked him, what did you see and what do you think? And his first words out of his mouth, I couldn't believe he said this. He was very candid. He said, widespread failures. I don't see how you guys are going to survive this.
Wow.
Yeah. And I appreciated his candor, but they were resolved that was not going to happen, even among the weakest of them. And so they supported each other, and we got through it, and not a bank failed through that entire experience.
Okay. So this is such an extraordinary story on so many levels, Peter. So, to your point about being counterintuitive, so, right. So after the hurricane has ravaged the city, right?
Yeah.
As the pandemic has done in 2020, you saw that not only did banks not fail, but they all came out stronger on the other side. So, I want to go at this from several different places. One is, what was counterintuitive that you incorporated from that experience that you carried into the pandemic? Let me start there.
Great question. First is the resilience of the banking industry. It's incredibly resilient. I saw what you can put a bank through. One of our bankers he later found out he had employees in 13 states and didn't know it. They had evacuated across to the Four Corners. So you can lose your employees, you can lose your data. One bank, the banks do backup tapes, so they can know what the previous day's balances were. He called his backup site, and they said, "There's no room in the inn, that we can't take you."
Yeah.
Um, and um, and so, and he also didn't have his backup tapes. They were on the second floor of the building, which was almost underwater. So we had to get a boat to take him in, break the windows, get his. I mean, they climbed into the bank, the tower of this bank, to get the backup tapes, just to find out that the backup site couldn't take them. So another bank ran his work for him and carried him through that experience. And they're dear friends to this day. Um, that's how resilient banking is. Also, how resilient our economy and our communities are. You can depopulate a city and ruin the infrastructure, the telephone lines, the sewer lines, the gas lines, everything can collapse, and people come back. You can go to New Orleans to this day, and it's just one of the most wonderful cities, full of life. So it's just a function of time. How long does it take? So when we came shortly after moving here, we had Hurricane Florence. It because of the awfulness that we went through in Katrina, I can look at a hurricane like Florence and say, okay, bankers, here's the plan. Here's what we're going to do, and everybody's going to be fine. It's just a matter of how soon are we going to be fine. Pandemics, same thing. I know how resilient our industry is, our communities, the American people. What's counterintuitive is how quickly we've snapped back. We were expecting really bad credit problems, and they just haven't happened. There have been isolated, and certainly individuals are hurting, and companies are hurting, but it's not widespread. It's not what we thought it was going to be. So we're in a much better place than we thought we were going to be. So because of those experiences, I don't worry. I just work.
And where do you, so going into a crisis, so two things, going into the kind of crisis we are emerging from, and, Hurricane Katrina, which was kind of your learning ground in a lot of ways. Where do you put your effort and focus in terms of the work, Peter? So during crisis, we've just come through a large one, but even, smaller. So you say, I don't worry, I just work. Where's your focus as a leader?
First of all, it's with my team, so they know that we're going to be fine. They know that we're going to get through this, and that they can have confidence in me. So that's the main thing. And then from there is to help them know what their role is with great clarity. Here's what I need you to do and what I need you to do. And the most important part in any of this is communication. And you've heard me describe it as relentless communication. The bankers, or whether it's shareholders of a company or stakeholders or a large group of employees in a large company, they need to know what's happening, and they need to know information as soon as it's available, because as you deliver information as soon as it's available and they see you doing it at 11 or 2 a.m. or 4 a.m., they know that if they haven't heard from you, there's nothing to tell. And so relentless communication, reliable communication is the most important asset in a situation like that. And so we can choose to value that asset and deliver it in the way I've described. And so our team knew how important that was. I had, during the pandemic, the early days, I had 3 people on call 24/7. And I took naps when I needed to, but I had these, these young people didn't sign up for this. And so I would say, okay, you're a night owl. I need you on call from 10 to 2, and then you from the morning hours. And so that I knew that if I got information, I could analyze it, put it together, give it to the appropriate one of them, and they would run it through our communications database, be my second set of eyes, because sometimes we're tired,
Absolutely.
and so I had to have a second set of eyes, and then they would get it out for me. within minutes.
Yeah, no, you guys were, as we've talked about, you were just your step. So it's interesting, the first place you went in response to this question was, you focused in terms of the work, you focused on your team, your staff. So there it is again, that emphasis on people, and then communication. And I remember, Peter, I mean, you were making sure the information was flowing, not just internally, of course, but externally to your constituents. Yeah.
And what's important is the feedback back to the staff, because a banker would say, at some odd hour, they would say, "Oh, thank you so much for this. I was waiting for this.
Yes.
We're going to have a meeting now to talk about this," or they would just say something kind. I found that throughout the pandemic, bankers are always nice, but they have been exceptionally grateful and demonstrative about it. They've used their big words, as my kids say. They've expressed their gratitude in emails and phone calls. And so anytime I get one of those, I share it with my team so they can see it, to know how important it is, because that says, oh, that's why we do this.
Yes.
Not just to make Peter happy. We're doing something for people.
Yes.
So the bigger purpose.
Yeah. Connecting them to that. Yeah. No, meeting and contribute. Absolutely. So, so out of Katrina, which was, as you've talked about here, and as we've talked about, kind of formative in shaping you as a leader and entering the pandemic. So, kind of resilience in knowing that, people and systems are in fact, capable of returning. It's a matter of time. Not to worry, but to work, and where you put those efforts. Anything else that came out of Katrina that really shaped you fundamentally as a CEO?
Relationships. And in two different ways. I learned that I didn't have relationships in place that I really should have. And so I was having to meet people under duress. And so that's not optimal, but it's also not bad. I'll say it again: in all things, give thanks. And so to this day, some of my dearest friends are people I met for the first time, begging for help, calling a regulatory agency, or I could go on and on. And it's just asking for help, and then having to work shoulder to shoulder to get through what we were going through. Those relationships are just priceless, and they're invaluable to me to this day. And so now it would have been easier to pick up with an existing relationship and say, okay, we got a situation, let's get to work. But so relationships, I meet anyone who's ever referred to me by a friend or a colleague. That's how you and I met. A friend said, "Hey, you have to meet Sarah." And so I said, "Well, totally. And I do my best work over food, so let's meet." And we did. And so that's just been my mantra my whole career. And so, but that focus was sharpened by Katrina. You just can't have too many friends. And I refer to them as friends. Some people say contacts, connections. Everybody's a friend to me.
So as a seasoned, experienced CEO who has been through a pandemic and the ringer of Katrina, what are you, where do you go to continue to learn, Peter? Kind of, where's your learning edge, and what are you trying to sharpen there? Where do you go to learn?
Well, you've heard me describe myself as terminally curious.
Yeah, which I love. Yes.
I want to know everything. I can't stand to see something and not understand how it works. And that also includes meeting people and knowing what makes them tick, why they're successful. So I talk to people and I ask a lot of questions. I read a lot of books so I can understand. I like history. I want to learn from our history. I like learning about other industries and trying to find the similarities between banking and those industries, And then association work. I like to compare associations to others. We're starting a benchmarking survey among other state bankers associations so we can look at our operations and get better. Until I retire, I won't be satisfied. It's just get better every day. One of our CEOs, Harold Keene at KS Bank, that's his mantra. He with his people, it's better every day, better every day. And that's a really good way to look at business and personal life. Is how can I be a little better every day, and it takes different shapes.
Yeah.
So curiosity is a major thing with me.
You'll get no fight from me, no argument from me on the value of curiosity. And so when you are up against something that you want some input on, where, if any place, do you kind of seek guidance?
I'm blessed to be surrounded by more seasoned than myself State Bankers Association execs. They've been at this longer than I have. They've been through the battles, and we compare notes. And what I find almost every time when I'll call, I love my friend Joe Brannon at the Georgia Bankers Association. I'm not going to say how old he is, but he's my gold standard. And I really look to him, and I'll call him asking for advice or just to talk about an issue. And he starts out so humble with, I don't know why you're calling me. It's humility is such a big thing with me. I love smart people who don't see it in themselves, but they have the confidence to give answers when asked. But there are so many that because I'm in the position I am as chair of the Alliance of State Bankers Associations this year, I see what each individual state is doing, and some are just brilliant at a particular thing because of their background, their experience, and I'll call them and lean on them and ask them. And so it just kind of depends on the circumstance.
So I'm hearing again kind of an emphasis on relationships and peer relationships with other leaders. Yeah.
Yes.
And, go ahead. What were you going to
say? It's just so important because it's all about people. Our objective is primarily as an organization is advocacy, and I can't really control the movement of legislation in Congress with just the 13 members of the House from North Carolina and our 2 senators. It takes every state association working, coordinating, and doing the same thing, pulling the rope in the same direction. And so we have to know each other, we have to trust each other, and we have to communicate a lot. So we meet every day, every Monday at 4:00.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's what we do.
And again, there's that relationship building. Yeah.
So important.
Yep. And so one of the things I often talk to leaders about or ask them about is where they go in times of crisis, kind of, in terms of, if they seek input and from whom, and kind of what they use to discern who they might kind of go to, because I often like to pursue this because I think, from what I see, the role is by its nature, we hear about kind of the loneliness of the role, and by its nature, its construct, it is, the higher you go, the more confidential information you're carrying around, the fewer people you can talk to, et cetera. Even if you're about transparency and communication, sometimes you're just, you're not able to share particular things. And so having some people with whom you can share. So if you were to suggest to a leader, what are the characteristics or the qualities in the people that you go to when you're kind of needing guidance or input?
It's such a great question, because I did believe as a young CEO, I felt it and I believed it, that it is lonely at the top. And then I came to the realization it doesn't have to be. That's that's a decision you make. And it's a
Mm.
decision you make to get out of it. And so, and I learned this from my executive assistant in Louisiana when I was brand new CEO, trying to figure out the big new office, and I was doing everything wrong, and she came in my office one day and closed the door, and she was in tears, and I had known her for probably 7 or 8 years. She worked for the previous CEO. And so I inherited her from that relationship. So we went from being peers to now she works for me. And she came in my office and closed the door. She was in tears and she said, "If you don't let me help you, I'm going to quit today." And it was that day I leaned back in my chair and just relaxed. And I said, "I can't
Mm.
afford to lose you. Tell me what I'm doing wrong and help me be better at what I do." And she had been watching the previous CEO for all those years. And she said, "Y'all are different. You're going to do things differently, but here's how I can help you." So I had to trust her. So it started with trust, and I knew I could trust her. I just had to give it to her. I just had to give it up. Um, and then I had to get to know my team well enough to know um, who I could go to for what. Um,
Mhm.
but um, but there are times when there are just things you can't talk to your team about.
Right. Yeah.
There are things you can't talk to your board about.
Right.
So, and then you come and you talk to your next door neighbor, your best friend, or your spouse, and they don't really understand because they don't see your world. And so I have other association CEOs that I'm really close to and I consider dear friends that we talk frequently just
Mhm.
about what's going on in your shop and what's going on with you.
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and so we do these conversations, and there are one or two in particular here in North Carolina that I do this with. It's frequent. It used to be over breakfast because, again, I do my best work over food, but we do it over the phone now, and we do it by Zoom so I can see their faces and I can read body language, and it's as good as being across a dinner table. It really is for me, and I could miss a meal. So we talk, and then if there's ever a crisis or
Mm.
something, we're picking up at a high level of trust because we've just agreed to bare our souls. We've agreed to talk candidly because I can't hurt him and he can't hurt me. We can only help each other. And um, and so that's who I go to, is someone who sees the world the way I do, does the work that I do, and would help me. If you were in this situation, what would you do?
Mhm.
And I have more than one that I do that with.
Mhm. 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 Yeah. So I'm hearing kind of really strong, again, relationship building, peer relationships, and high degree of trust.
Yes.
High degree
Yes.
of trust. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Um, so as I'm just mindful of our time here, Peter. So as we wind down, I want to ask you the last question that I ask every interviewee of the Making Magnificence project, which is the best advice you never got.
Never got. Um, well, I'll start with a little context because I've been blessed to have some wonderful mentors, from my father to the first CEO who gave me my job in banking, and but for him, I tell people I wouldn't have indoor work today. My banking professor I mentioned earlier, all of these people were like walking classrooms, and they
Mm.
talked their way through their relationship with me, and so every day, and I'm not being, this isn't hyperbole. Every day I hear their voices in my head of the
Mm-hmm.
things that they said frequently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm a combination of all those people. And so I can't think of any advice that I didn't get, because they just poured their lives into me. So
Mm.
this feeling of duty with my team and also my kids is to be a living instructor, just constantly Like we would go to the store and we would get bad service, or at a restaurant, and we would walk out and my dad would say, "What just happened there? What would you do differently?" The same thing at the bank. My CEO would tell me things that happened in the bank. I remember the day I watched him in a meeting, and at the end of the day, I stopped by his office, and because as a management trainee, they had allowed me to sit in on this really important meeting, and he just knew what to do. He was shooting directions everywhere and just handled it masterfully. And at the end of the day, I dropped by his office and said goodbye, good night. And he said, "What'd you think of our meeting today?" And I said, "Frankly, I'm frustrated because I want to be able to do what you do." Well, there I was, a 20-something-year-old kid in a suit I bought on a credit card, just trying to look like a bank executive. And he said, and he never called me by my name. It was always Chief or whatever. He said, "Chief, here's the deal. We're both smart guys. I've just been lied to more than you have." And so what he was telling me was he was more experienced, and you can't rush experience. And I just kind of relaxed that day. And I said, I just need to be older. And when someone lies to me, because in banking, that's what happens. Borrowers don't always do what they're supposed to do. And they'll tell you a story. When you get lied to, when you have a bad experience, when you're disappointed in a person or a company, it's not the end of the world. That's part of your growth journey. You learn from it and you say, okay, what happened? Learn from it. That's where my all things give thanks things comes from, is I don't have to cry and moan. I can say, what am I supposed to learn from this? And be better tomorrow, be better the next day. So I feel guilty saying I can't think of the best advice that I never got. But I'm still looking because I'm curious.
There it is. Terminally curious. My guest today has been Peter Gwaltney, President and CEO of the North Carolina Bankers Association. Peter, thank you for this conversation. It's been a delight.
Well, bless you, Sarah. Thank you so much.